Well, welcome back. We're looking again at gotquestions.org, their review of Swedenborgianism, back onto those third and fourth paragraphs. So today, the point they've offered as a summary of Swedenborgian teaching says, Jesus Christ's death did not atone for our sin. Salvation comes by practicing what you believe, whatever religion it might be. And that's contrasted with their biblical Christianity perspective. The Bible is also very clear on Jesus' vicarious atonement for our sin, and that it is only through belief in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection that salvation is possible. Now, whilst it's certainly true that Swedenborg proposes a different understanding of the atonement and how it was achieved, there's been no real attempt here to genuinely understand what Swedenborg writes. If you want to explore Swedenborg's understanding of the redemption, I can suggest a couple of things. The first is watch those first 3 videos of our True Christianity playlist, particularly the third. Even better, however, you could go and read them for yourself. A True Christian Religion, Chapter 2, which is titled The Lord the Redeemer. And you'll also find much of that same material in the short work Doctrine of the Lord. But I'll just offer you this. Redemption and the passion on the cross must be thought of as 2 distinct events. Otherwise, men's minds will ground like a ship on sandbanks or rocks and sink. That is to say, it will go astray in all matters which concern salvation from the Lord. I just want to contrast the 2 statements they've made, summarising the Swedenborgian side and the biblical Christianity side. So on the one hand, they've said Jesus Christ's death did not atone for our sin, and on the other, only through belief in Jesus' life, death, and resurrection that salvation is possible. And what I want to say is I actually completely agree with the second phrase if I remove the words belief in. It is only through Jesus' life, death, and resurrection that salvation is possible. Now you might say I'm splitting hairs. What's the difference? Well, here it is. It was not Jesus' death on its own that saved us. His death and resurrection are merely the climax of his life and a process that took place throughout his life. And alongside of that, as soon as we recognise the nature of God as divine love and the true oneness of God, then the whole vicarious atonement theory, as it's traditionally presented, falls apart. It is a fundamental error to believe that the passion on the cross was the real act of redemption. That error, together with the erroneous belief in 3 divine persons, has so perverted the whole church that there is no remainder of spirituality left in it. And the thing is that Jesus' life had its effect irrespective of our belief in it. But while it makes our individual salvation possible, it does not assure it. So what does assure it? Well, let's go have a look at the passages they've quoted from the Bible. So they start with 1 Peter 2, verse 24, but I'm going to rewind a little bit and start at verse 18, just to set it in context. Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. For this is commendable if, because of conscience towards God, one endures grief, suffering wrongly. For what credit is it if, when you are beaten for your faults, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God. For to this you were called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that you should follow his steps, who committed no sin, nor was deceit found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously, who himself bore our sins in his own body on the tree, that we, having died to sins, might live for righteousness, by whose stripes you were healed. Now, when we take that passage as a whole, to what end is Peter exhorting us? He's imploring us to practice patience in suffering we do not deserve, as Christ also suffered. And what about his vicarious atonement for sin? Well, this passage doesn't demand it. We're not talking about the righteous judgment of God here, nor is there any implication that Jesus stood in our place before a righteous judge. The judges spoken of here are unjust. Peter does not speak of God's judgment except by way of contrast with these unjust human judges. And it places demands upon our behaviour. It says Christ left us an example that you should follow his steps, that we, having died to sin, might live for righteousness. Let's go on to 1 John chapter 2. My little children, these things I write to you so that you may not sin. And if anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous. And he himself is the propitiation for our sins, and not for ours only, but also for the whole world. We talked about that last time. But let's go on a little. Now by this we know that we know him, if we keep his commandments. He who says, I know him, and does not keep his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whoever keeps his word, truly the love of God is perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him. He who says he abides in him ought himself also to walk just as he walked. Again, that passage places demands upon our own behaviour. John chapter 14 verse 6. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And I say yes. Only Jesus Christ, through his own divine power, could have achieved what he achieved. But that does not demand of us a verbal acknowledgement, as is suggested here. Final passage, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 1 to 4. Moreover, brethren, I declare to you the gospel which I preached to you, which also you received, and in which you stand, by which also you are saved, if you hold fast that word which I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I delivered to you first of all that which I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried and he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures. So I'm just going to ask you, verse 2, what does it mean to believe in vain? Is it possible that Paul is saying that one might believe and still not be saved? Secondly, we go on to verse 3. When it says Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, I had a look at that word for, and the Greek word is hyper. And according to the concordance, it says hyper is usually best translated as for the betterment of. So what Christ suffered, he suffered for our betterment. And so these passages, far from demanding belief, point to the fallacy of mere belief. Paul continues, For I am the least of the apostles, who am not worthy to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God I am what I am, and his grace toward me was not in vain, but I laboured more abundantly than they all. Yet not I, but the grace of God which was with me. So Paul is talking about the change that has been brought about by God in his own heart, which led to a complete reset in the way that he acted in the world. Look, I don't know about you, but it seems to me the passages that they've quoted here prove the opposite of what they're actually trying to say. If you want some bonus passages, I'll pop them in the description, but I would be interested to hear what you think. Do feel free to drop a comment down below. As always, keep it friendly, and I look forward to seeing you next time.